Shakespeare's Macbeth called sleep the balm of hurt minds and the chief nourisher in life's feast. Yet like Macbeth, many of us are undernourished on the sleep front, feeling groggy and ragged as morning rolls around, and reciprocally wide awake come midnight, when we should be fast asleep. Sleep medicine and internal medicine Dr. Roger Seheult says this is often due to a mismatch between our internal clocks and the sunrise-sunset rhythm of the day. Today, he reveals how our body clocks influence sleep and shares a range of strategies to realign them with the motion of the day, including how we might vary brightness and temperature and even restrict our time for sleep to sleep better. We'll also cover how our ancient ancestors displayed better sleep hygiene than we do, and how and when to take melatonin to optimize its effects. Dr. Seheult's current practice is in Beaumont, California, where he is a critical care physician, pulmonologist, and sleep physician at Optum, California. He is co-founder of MedCram, which has garnered over 1.5 million YouTube followers through demystifying medical concepts. Welcome to Vital Signs, where we learn how to get healthy from all angles, from the biochemical and nutritional to the things we do that nourish our minds and our souls. I'm Brendon Fallon. Dr. Seheult, always a pleasure to have you join us on Vital Signs.
Thank you, Brendon. It's good to be here.
Especially with your being a specialist in sleep medicine, you bring a tremendous wealth of knowledge to this topic, and I really appreciate your focus on natural medicine for this in particular. When we talk about optimizing sleep, are we talking about getting more REM sleep, more deep sleep? Does this factor into the stages of sleep? What are we talking about specifically?
Yeah, so let's look at this holistically and on a big scale here. Basically, you want to be able to have optimized sleep. What you want is you want to be able to fall asleep relatively quickly and not have insomnia to fall asleep. You want to have a type of sleep that's uninterrupted, so you're not interrupting your sleep in the middle of the night, getting up frequently. And you want to be able to wake up the next morning feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. And so that's what I would say is optimal sleep. And how we can achieve that, there's many different ways. What's causing us not to be able to achieve that? There's many different problems, but that's ultimately the goal. And I think there's very good data that shows that when we achieve optimal sleep, it's good for a whole host of things in our body: metabolic, immune, cancer fighting, chronic diseases, all sorts of things.
And these kinds of health effects, are they more associated with getting a particular type of sleep in terms of getting more deep sleep, getting more of a particular stage of sleep?
There are certain diseases that we have now, because of research, tied to specifically different aspects of sleep. I'll give you an example. There's two types of sleep that we'll talk about quite frequently, probably on this program today. One of them is deep sleep, as you mentioned. Deep sleep or slow wave sleep is a type of sleep that we typically see toward the beginning of the night, perhaps the hours of sleep that we get before midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And they're characterized by electrical impulses in our brain that are very large in amplitude and very slow. That's why it's called slow wave sleep. What we see in people who are not getting this type of sleep or deficiency in this type of sleep, we see two major things that we have good research for. Number one is we see a reduction in insulin sensitivity. Putting it another way, we see a trend toward diabetes. So that's something that we have seen, and there's good research on that. The other thing that we are seeing is, and this ties into sort of the trash compactor of the brain, if you will, which is the fluid that surrounds the brain. That's called cerebral spinal fluid. Now, what they're starting to show is that slow wave sleep that is very large in amplitude is actually causing a pulsation, if you will, of the lymphatic system around the brain, which is responsible for taking away the impurities, the discarded proteins that are being produced in the brain away from the brain and having it recycled. Now, that's important because obviously if you're not pulling those proteins away from the brain, they're going to accumulate. And we see this actually quite often in degenerative brain diseases like Alzheimer's dementia, Parkinson's, things of that nature. And so it's important to have slow wave sleep. Now, I'll say this though, is that when we look at somebody who is healthy, when we look at someone who has optimal sleep, we don't see their entire night full of slow wave sleep. There's different types of sleep that happen at different times of the night. We can talk about what we see typically, but it's a mix. We see REM sleep, we see slow wave sleep, we see non-REM sleep, which is not slow wave sleep. And the architecture of that sleep is generally a broad mix of all of those. Typically slow wave sleep toward the beginning of the night, REM sleep towards the end of the night, and then we see a little bit of neither of those things sort of spread out in between. The one thing that I would add that's really interesting about this is that when people are very young, so teenagers, even adolescents and even younger school-age children, we see that their sleep is packed full of either slow wave sleep or REM sleep. And as we get older, predominantly after 40 years of age, we start to see this decline, is we start to see slow wave sleep getting less and less. We see REM sleep getting less and less. And when we see this is kind of this nondescript type of non-slow wave, non-REM sleep that starts to fill in all of these gaps. And we see this normally. This is happening normally. So the answer to your question is there particular types of sleep that has names to it, like slow wave sleep and REM sleep, that is associated with optimal sleep in particular areas? The answer is yes to that. We haven't figured out all of those things, but there is data that's coming out that shows that, in fact, if you're not getting enough of a particular type of sleep, it can cause problems.
I think I can relate to this circumstance somewhat because I've had that experience often in the past of not sleeping well and then having brain fog as a result. And when I think back to my 20s, a particular time where I had pressure from a very demanding job, which was also very rewarding, and I really valued this job, so I wanted to keep it, but really brought my sleeping problems to the forefront. And prior to that, during my adolescence, I think I developed some behavior patterns that weren't great, like drinking things I shouldn't have been drinking, eating things I shouldn't have been eating, going to bed too late, and subsequently I had disrupted sleep. And I was prescribed medication. I was reluctant to take it, but I was given benzodiazepines, I think like Valium. And I remember trying this, and although I might sleep for 8 hours, I'd wake up feeling groggy and probably worse than if I'd had poor sleep without the medication.
Yeah, that is certainly something that would be validated in medical knowledge and also in experience. Many of these medications do reduce some of this sleep. And so when we talk about sleeping pills or medications that are sleep aids, really what they're designed to do is to get you to sleep faster and keep you asleep in terms of quantity. But in terms of quality, many of these medications actually reduce the type of sleep that we were just talking about, slow wave sleep and or REM sleep. And in this case, Valium, which is a benzodiazepine, is a medication that is well known to reduce REM sleep.
I guess that explains the lack of feeling refreshed when taking that kind of medication. I guess I woke up to that, excuse the pun, and I was virtually forced to change my lifestyle because if I want to keep this job, which I really value, I need to stop focusing on this problem so much. And I started, even if I didn't sleep well, I'd get up early in the morning, get out, do exercise. Even if I was feeling very fatigued, I'd still be doing exercise. I think probably improve my diet. And lo and behold, it didn't take long before I'd start feeling tired at night and started sleeping. And I wonder how this might tie in with what you know about how the body clock works.
Yeah, absolutely. So the circadian clock is that master clock that's in the brain. You had a lot of insight to see that was what was affecting your life. Many people don't have that insight. And that's what we work with every day is those types of people. But there's all of these things are so interconnected. There's the circadian rhythm, circadian clock. And the way I try to describe that is imagine a conductor of an orchestra. There is the violin section, there is the flute section, there's the percussion, there is the brass. All of these are things that are going on in your body in terms of different systems. But what the circadian clock does is it synchronizes all of the clocks that are going on in your body to make sure that they are all happening at the same time. And that's what the conductor does. What's very interesting, and what science is finding out right now, is that there are so many different processes that are occurring at different times of the day in your body that actually change the way you interact with medications, that change the way that you actually perform. I'll give you some examples about why this is so important. It's gotten to the point that if an elite athlete is going to be in a competition and they're going to be training for a race and they know the time of day that the race is going to be, they will have them train at that time of day for that race so that they know exactly how that person is going to be at that race. Give you another example. When they test medications, what we're finding out in the pharmacological world is that some of the findings may be completely inaccurate because of the time of day that some of the medicines may be tested on a human being because of the circadian rhythm. To put it into a fuller picture for you, to give you an analogy, imagine Disneyland. Okay, I had actually, when I was growing up, I had a friend that worked at Disneyland, but he didn't work there during the day. He worked there at night. And it was an amazing thing for him because he shared with me how things completely change at night. You know, we go to Disneyland and there's a park. We go on the rides. We go into the exhibits. We go into the gift shops, and all of these things are designed for us to be using in the day. But as soon as the park closes at night, there's an army of people that come in and scrape the gum off of the sidewalk. There's somebody that is taking the cash out of the cash register, someone that is restocking the gift shop. Engineers are shutting down Space Mountain and checking the joints to making sure. So in other words, there's all of these processes that are occurring at night that are completely different systems. Gardeners are coming in and weeding the garden, the beautiful gardens that you see, such that when 8 o'clock in the morning rolls around, or 7 o'clock, or whenever Disneyland opens, when it opens, you're opening up to a brand new park that's been completely gone over once throughout the night. And so when you walk in, it's ready to go. You know, our bodies are far more complex than Disneyland, but that's a very good analogy as to what happens. Everything in our body is set to a clock, set to a time for things to happen exactly when they should be. Generally speaking, the things that are involved with living our life during the day, you know, exercising, using our muscles, eating, all of these processes that we must do when we are awake, they involve a certain amount and a certain section and a certain cadre, if you will, of enzymes that are supposed to be on and active. And when we go to sleep, those enzymes shut down and a whole different set of enzymes become active. Enzymes that are involved in repair, enzymes that are involved in rest. And even within that period of time that we're asleep, there are certain times of the day, certain times at night where certain things must happen in the right way. There's proteins that have built up in the cerebral spinal fluid of the brain. They need to be flushed out. There are memories that have been written down on the RAM, if you will, of our brain, the short-term memory, that need to be organized and put into long-term memory. That's what happens during REM sleep. There is our growth. So when we're children and we are growing, that predominantly happens during the first phase of sleep. That's slow wave sleep, where growth hormone secretion is really at its highest and making you feel good and taking care of insulin sensitivity and all these sorts of things. So you're absolutely right. The circadian rhythm is an extremely important cycle that needs to be nourished and protected because it tells our body these sorts of things that need to happen. Imagine with me, if you would, what would happen if the engineers at Disneyland came in during the day and shut down Space Mountain? Obviously, the experience of people going to Disneyland during the day would not be the same, right? Because a ride is shut down. Imagine if you're in line at It's a Small World and the beautiful garden that's outside is being weeded by gardeners. It's going to take away from that experience. Same thing with our circadian rhythm. If we interrupt our circadian rhythm, if we're not nurturing our circadian rhythm with things that tell it when it's supposed to happen, we too are going to have a reduced experience during the day and also at night when these things should be happening.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly elegant and sophisticated. And I have the sense that traditional cultures were worked to be more in line with this body clock and to organize their routines of the day to align with that, possibly better than many people are doing in the West at the moment. Could you give a snapshot, Dr. Seheult, like in an average person's day, what kind of things would be happening? Like, for example, when they start to feel alert, when they might have the first bowel movement, that kind of thing, as coordinated by the circadian rhythms?
Yes, actually, there's a very good delineation of that I've seen where it shows basically a big circle, and you go around the clock. And you're right. So, the first thing in the morning typically is a bowel movement that occurs. As you go on, your insulin sensitivity is the best at that time, which is the reason why I think many people recommend that if you're going to do intermittent fasting, that breakfast is actually the best time of the day to actually take calories into your body, because that's when insulin is the most efficacious. The body is most sensitive to insulin in the morning time. As the day goes on, coordination starts to improve. Early afternoon is when many times people's athletic abilities are the best, is in the early afternoon. And as we go through the rest of the day, toward 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, there's a little bit of a dip in terms of activity, but then it picks up again at 7, 8, 9 o'clock. By 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock, this is when melatonin starts to be secreted from the pineal gland as a signal to the entire body that things are going to be shutting down and you're going to be going to bed. And then throughout the night, these processes that we just talked about are occurring, and the temperature in the body hits its lowest point probably around 4 o'clock. An important point when we talk about how to affect the circadian rhythm. And then as the body starts to warm up, cortisol levels start to peak early in the morning, and the cycle repeats itself again. So the body looks very different physiologically at different times of the day because there are different hormones that are being secreted at different times of the day.
Through my experience struggling with sleep and through the kind of education I've had from people like you, Dr. Seheult, I'm quite conscious of my daily routines. And actually, I was in this office late at night last week wearing sunglasses based on your advice to limit the amount of light exposure I was getting. And I find that if I try to do something like prepare for this interview late at night, it's probably going to interrupt my sleep. But if I'm doing something like if I'm writing in a journal, or if I'm thinking about something creative, like the design that might be put on the video's image, I don't find that so taxing, and that's not such an issue. So do you have any idea why some mental tasks would disrupt sleep while others may not?
Yeah, and it has to do with what we call Zeitgebers. So this is a German word that has been used extensively in this area that we're talking about as what is an out or an external effect on the human body that would affect circadian rhythm and therefore sleep. And light is the most powerful Zeitgeber. There are other Zeitgebers, things that affect our circadian rhythm, like when it is time to eat, other social cues, activity. These things all enter in and tell the body, what time of day it is, and therefore what part of the circadian rhythm should we be in. But light, by large, the part is the most powerful one. And we know that now physiologically why that's the case, because we have neurons at the back, photosensors at the back of our retina that go directly onto the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is exactly where the circadian rhythm sits. And so when you are having light coming into the eyes, perhaps if you're up on your computer at night and you're working on something as opposed to just writing things down in a dimly lit room, that light is going to really impact the cycle of the circadian rhythm. So think about this. This is actually hardwired in. This is not a learned type of situation. The circadian rhythm is looking for inputs from the external environment to decide to make sure that it is synchronized, the internal clock with the external clock. And we're going to see this over and over again. And when it sees light coming into the eyes during a period of the circadian rhythm, when it's determined that it's nighttime, that's a major red flag for the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And what it determines is that it's decided that it must have brought on sleep, or the nighttime portion of the circadian rhythm inside the body, too early. Why do I say that? Well, it's seeing that light is coming in from the outside, and the natural conclusion based on how the circuits are designed is that if there's light coming in, it must be day. And if it's saying that it's night, it must be too early. And therefore, what light has the effect on towards the end of the day is that it delays the circadian rhythm. So this is a really important thing to understand, is that if you are exposing your eyes to light at night, and who isn't, right? We have lights all over the place. We have our devices. We have all of these modern cues that are affecting the circadian rhythm. What this is going to do is delay the circadian rhythm. So instead of falling asleep at night at 9, 10, or 11 o'clock, that constant light exposure is going to delay your circadian rhythm so that you're now no longer getting tired at the normal time. You're getting tired now at 11, 12, or 1 o'clock in the morning. So if you decide all of a sudden that you want to fall asleep at the time that you normally wanted to fall asleep at, which is 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, your body is not ready for that sleep because the circadian rhythm has gradually shifted to that later time. It's become delayed. And as a result, it's not going to automatically switch back. That's the problem with circadian rhythm, is that it takes days for it to make these shifts. So if you have for weeks or months delayed your circadian rhythm so that you're now falling asleep normally at 1 o'clock in the morning, realize that your body wants to get about 8 hours of sleep, and it does not want to be woken up until about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. And so obviously, if your work schedule doesn't change, think about what's going to happen just with what we've just talked about. Number one, you're going to want to fall asleep at 10 or 11 o'clock at night one day, and you're not going to be able to. That's called insomnia. When you finally do go to sleep and you wake up in the morning, your alarm is going to be what's waking you up at 6 o'clock in the morning. You're not going to get that full night of sleep. You're going to be chronically sleep deprived, and you're not going to be able to do your work very well during the day. And then at night, you're going to be up late trying to catch up. And what you're going to do is reinforce this delaying of the circadian rhythm. So you can see there, just by this one little aspect, one little circuit that we're talking about, how external factors in our environment can gravely impact the quality of sleep that we're getting.
Our ancestors, our primitive ancestors, would be better placed to have in terms of their environment, to be looking after their circadian rhythms, because they wouldn't have these technological interferences that we have.
Exactly. And these are technological advances, by the way, that have only been affecting humans probably for the last 100 years, maybe 120, 130 years. If you go back to the kerosene lit lamps that were, starting in the late 1800s, that's really when we started turning night into day and having these health benefits, or not health benefits, health detriments.
I don't know, it's probably Hollywood influence, but when I think about the caveman, I imagine them sitting around a camp, like a fire, and the modern equivalent is the camping trip. And I wouldn't imagine that to be necessarily stimulating. Like if we looking at the light of a candle, it could have a soothing effect on the mind. Is that the case, or is there something different about this type of light, or the way it was received to how we're receiving light now?
There is something different about it. And there's actually several things different about it that make a candlelight or a campfire actually much less detrimental than the type of situation that we have today. So we have to go to physiology to look at why. In the retina, which is where those photoreceptors are, those photoreceptors generally line the bottom of our retina. And because the image, when it hits our lens, gets flipped upside down, as you may recall, that means that because the photoreceptors are in the lower hemispheres of our retina, that means that they are looking at light in the upper visual fields. What does that mean? That means that light, particularly in the upper visual fields of our vision, is going to be the type of light that is going to affect our circadian rhythm the most. That's number one. Number two is that these intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells in the back of our retina are more primed to pick up blue light rather than red light. In other words, shortwave light towards the bluer end of the spectrum, rather than light more towards the redder end of the spectrum. So if I could sort of dichotomize this, the type of light that would be most impacting our circadian rhythm would be the light that is high up and is more towards the blue side of things, And think about LED lights in our ceilings, in our homes, that type of thing, versus sitting at a campfire, which is a fire sitting in front of us down low, generally speaking, and more of a hydrocarbon fire, which has less of the blue light and more of the red, visible, and infrared light.
So there is a kind of scientific basis to the calming effect of fireside light or candlelight. That's interesting. I'd like to take it back again, Dr. Seheult, to my example with my sleep issue, which I'd resolved somewhat in my early 20s and then cut to my later 20s. Again, I'm doing a rewarding job that is also very demanding, and there's this almost endless stream of work coming through, these endless cases that I'm dealing with. And I now have a better habits around sleep. I'm going to bed at a reasonable time. I'm getting up. I have to get up at a good time in the morning. But with this endless work coming through, I'm working almost constantly, like right to the end of the day to get this work done. And I see my sleeping start to deteriorate again. And I'm aware of feeling more stressed. And I wonder, looking back, how much stress itself factors into our circadian rhythms and then influencing sleep.
Very good question. So one of the things that we talked about in terms of circadian rhythm was that at night, we see melatonin being secreted right before sleep, and we see cortisol levels that are peaking in the morning time to sort of get you ready. Cortisol is sort of the hormone of being awake and doing stuff. It's kind of like the oil in the engine. It just basically makes things run better. Whereas melatonin is the signal that you're about to go to sleep. What we find with people who are under a lot of stress is they have cortisol levels that are elevated, which is good in a way, but bad in another way. We want to see a nice peak of cortisol in the morning and then have it come back down again. What we see with people who have chronic stress is they have chronically elevated cortisol levels, which can interfere with your ability to fall asleep at night. So that's one of the issues there as well. What we typically see, and one of the things that allows us to have a nice peak of cortisol in the morning, is exercise in the morning and being exposed to bright light in the morning. Those are things that help accentuate the circadian rhythm and have a nice peak up and down. When people are under a lot of stress, they are not able to sleep. And this gets into a type of insomnia that's not related to necessarily hormones, but it can be related to behaviors that we adopt that can be reinforcing in a bad way. This has a term that we use in sleep medicine called psychophysiological insomnia. And just to give you an example of a little bit of what could happen, imagine that you're under a lot of stress and you're worried about the fact that you're not getting enough sleep. And so what you decide to do is, because you've skipped out on a lot of sleep, you're finally able to get your work done. You decide to go to bed. And you say, you know what? I need to get as much sleep as I possibly can. I'm going to go to sleep maybe an hour or two earlier than what I would normally do. And so you do that. And of course, the problem is that you can't go to sleep, generally speaking, if it's not time to go to sleep, right? So you go into bed, it's not time to go to sleep, you're not tired, and you're awake. And as you're awake there in bed, you realize that you can't sleep. And that in and of itself makes you worried. And as you become more worried about the fact that you can't sleep, now you actually develop anxiety, which does prevent you from going to sleep. And then you associate the bedroom with all of those feelings of not being able to sleep, such that, because of classical conditioning, whenever you go into your bedroom, now you start to feel anxious about this performance that you're supposed to be putting on to fall asleep, and you cannot fall asleep. And so this is an example of what we call a perpetuating factor. There's a number of different things in terms of insomnia. There are predisposing factors. That's just the way you are genetically. There is a precipitating factor, like it might be the stress in your job that's caused you to go to sleep earlier. And then the perpetuating factors is the going to sleep earlier. And the perpetuating is it's causing you to be very anxious about the fact that you can't sleep. And a lot of what we do in sleep medicine is to deconstruct a lot of these bad behaviors that will give people confidence about being able to go to sleep and take away that performance anxiety, that psychophysiological insomnia, so that they can walk into their bedroom once again, not feel the stress of that, and be able to fall asleep very easily and go to bed. And notice that all of this is without using medications or sleep medicines.
Could you speak about some of these kinds of strategies that are used in sleep medicine to help people deconstruct bad sleeping routines?
Yeah, so one of the things that we typically do is we tell patients that if they are in their bed and they cannot fall asleep, we do not want them to associate their bedroom with failure to sleep. So we tell them to get out of the bedroom. We also want to use classical conditioning to the maximum so that when they are in their bedroom, we really don't want any kind of cross effects to occur where we're stimulating them or associating with things that are not related to sleep. What I mean by this is no working in the bedroom, no television in the bedroom. In other words, just use your bedroom for sleep or sex, basically. So we want to concentrate that down. The other thing that we might do for patients if we've exhausted all of these things is to do something we call sleep restriction therapy. Now, this should be done under supervision because it can actually make you worse at the beginning before it gets better. But what we will do is we will limit your availability to sleep to only 4 or 5 hours. And you can imagine that at the beginning of that, you're going to be very, very sleepy. And so what happens is typically they actually fall asleep very quickly. Once that starts to happen on a regular basis, we then start to allow them more time to sleep. And eventually what happens is that they become very confident in their ability to fall asleep. They're no longer anxious. And so when they walk into their bedroom and fall asleep very quickly, the same anxieties that they used to have go away completely. It's not a performance anymore. And we notice that the things that have caused the perpetuating factors that have caused them to become insomniacs have gone away. And after months and months of doing this, we actually can get patients sleeping well again.
I've observed this myself. I actually went through a phase where I thought I need to get out of my bedroom because there's something about my bedroom that is affecting me and making me not want to sleep. And I think it's reflected in what you're saying, that I built up these kinds of associations with the activities, watching TV in there and working in there. And interesting that shortening the available amount of time for sleep would allow a person to really optimize their sleeping schedule.
Yeah. It's the opposite of what you would think, but it's a way to it's taking that energy of the day where they could not fall asleep and making their day the next time much easier to fall asleep.
I've had sleeping problems if I've entered into a routine, like a new routine with work or something, where I've had restricted time to sleep. It has ultimately helped me, but I've struggled in the beginning of that. So that makes sense. You did touch on heat earlier on in the interview and alluded to something around that as far as how we might treat our bodies to optimize sleep. Does the kind of showering we do at night or the time of showering, how can we use heat to influence a good night's sleep?
Yeah, so a hot shower, something that's going to raise your body temperature at night, could actually be beneficial because as you cool down, that having a cool bedroom and having a cool environment is going to be beneficial to falling asleep. Now, there's something that happens as well as you go through to sleep about 4 o'clock in the morning. Your temperature continues to decline until it hits the lowest point, which is about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And from there, it starts to heat up. So we know that having a cool bedroom or having a cool body temperature for many people is imperative for having a good night's sleep. And so we do encourage that coolness or that cooling off to be there if possible. And one of the ways of doing that is doing heat or doing a hot shower. One thing that I've noticed is a sauna. Sauna at night actually improves and increases slow wave sleep, the same sort of slow wave sleep that we were talking about at the beginning. And so that can be actually very beneficial.
The cooling off that you mentioned, it peaks around 4 a.m.
Yeah.
Is there anything that should be done to not interrupt that physiology?
Yeah, if you keep that the way it is, that's actually very beneficial. What we as scientists use that information for is understanding how the circadian rhythm could be changed. And what I mean by that is that these Zeitgebers, like light, for instance, light that is introduced into the system before that low temperature is reached at 4 o'clock in the morning tends to delay the circadian rhythm, whereas light after that tends to advance it. What I mean to say is that light has a completely different effect on the circadian rhythm depending on when it's introduced into the system. If it's introduced into the system before the temperature nadir, before 4 o'clock in the morning, that has a tendency of delaying the circadian rhythm. After the temperature nadir, after 4 o'clock in the morning, it has the opposite effect. It tends to advance the circadian rhythm.
Fascinating that our bodies are adjusting their temperature to such a degree as we're sleeping. Just finally, Dr. Seheult, as we're coming to a close, I wonder if you could give a brief roundup of the different principles you've discussed that can help someone to get a better night's sleep based largely on their circadian rhythms, but also other aspects that we've talked about.
Absolutely. So there's some people that tend to go to bed or feel sleepy early in the day. These are generally people who are older, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. And so as long as they're not having any problems, there's not much to do. But if they feel like they're going to bed at 6 o'clock in the evening and waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they want to change that, then in that situation, they'd want to delay their circadian rhythm. And that would mean exposing their eyes to bright light after 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night to try to delay that circadian rhythm, make it come later in the night.
How much exposure would they need to have that effect?
Not too much, because the retina is actually very sensitive in the evening time to that type of light. So just having lights on, being in front of a computer, these sorts of things. These are actually the sort of things that unfortunately give us the other problem. So it's very capable of taking care of that type of issue. I think the majority of the patients, though, out there, the majority of the issues out there are people that have delayed circadian rhythms, people that are going to bed later, and they would rather like to go to bed earlier. And one of the major symptoms of that is sleep onset insomnia, so not being able to fall asleep very quickly. And one of the things I would highly recommend in those patients is to expose their eyes to bright morning light exposure. It's not enough just to turn the lights on in the house, because we're talking about early in the morning. The best way to make an effective change in that situation is to get outside. That's where the light is the brightest. That's where you're going to have the most effect. And it needs to be done early in the morning. You do that early in the morning, even though it's so far away from that night's going to bed episode, there actually is an effect where bright morning light exposure is going to help you tremendously in the evening. Maybe tremendously is too much of a word, but it's going to significantly help based on the data to have you have a much better night of sleeping that night. And the reason, again, is because it is synchronizing your circadian rhythm, number one. And number two, it is also going to cause there to be more melatonin at night and more cortisol early in the morning. And it's also finally going to advance your circadian rhythm. And that's the key. Advancing that circadian rhythm back from 1 o'clock in the morning to 12 and 11 and 10 over the week that you do this, you're going to notice that you're going to be able to fall asleep much more easily, and you're going to have a much better night's sleep.
In a moment, we'll hear how to go about finding a sleep medicine specialist and how melatonin can be taken safely and for maximum effectiveness. But first, is coffee ultimately good for us? I weigh up its risks in light of its benefits. Here's a quick look. These new drinks benefited more than just the taste buds. Coffee arrived in England in the 1650s, was linked to greater advancements in human thought at the time. You might take a cup of coffee to get your morning buzz. It dispels drowsiness, enhances attention, raises alertness, and can make thinking more clear and agile. However, I think often subconsciously we're chasing the caffeine kick. I refer, of course, to caffeine's addiction and habit-forming potential. Videos abound on YouTube with titles like "Why I'll Never Drink Coffee Again" or "The 7 Remarkable Health Benefits of Coffee." So which is it? Is coffee the extender of life or the harbinger of death? Strap yourselves in for a deep dive into coffee's risks versus benefits. Afterward, find the link to that video at the top of the comments and also in this video's description below. And if you're finding this video helpful, please be sure to share it with family and friends by clicking the share arrow below. Just lastly, Dr. Seheult, for people who aren't getting anywhere trying to control their sleep, if they want to seek the assistance of a sleep medicine specialist, what's the best way they can go about finding that kind of support?
Well, what they would need to see is a board-certified sleep specialist in the United States that would be boarded in the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. And generally speaking, the way that you would get to them is with a referral from your primary care physician. And so see your doctor, ask them to see a sleep specialist if you're not having luck with, the regular types of recommendations that you're getting from your doctor. And they will, generally speaking, make a referral. You'll sit down for a good 40 minutes to an hour with a sleep specialist, go over a detailed history about the medicines that you're taking, the history, when this started, and other further tests that they may decide to order to investigate the cause.
Speaking of medications, makes me think about the natural side of that as well, like melatonin. How much would people want to take melatonin if they, in an effort to adjust their circadian rhythm?
Yeah, so if someone wanted to advance their circadian rhythm, like we talked about with people exposing their eyes to bright sunlight in the morning, you can also add to that taking a bit of melatonin in the evening time, maybe about an hour before you are expecting to go to bed. I would make sure that you get a reputable brand of melatonin, one that's actually investigated by a third-party laboratory, to make sure that it's actually melatonin in there, because it's not regulated, at least here in the United States. In other countries, it's actually a prescription medication, which is good because you're actually getting melatonin. It's regulated. It's very interesting about melatonin. I would not go above 5 milligrams. Actually, in terms of sleep and shifting the circadian rhythm, taking smaller doses is actually more effective, believe it or not. Higher doses don't tend to be as effective. So anywhere between 0.5 milligrams of melatonin all the way up to 5 milligrams of melatonin, I would start on the lower range and then work up if you're not seeing an effect.
Thank you so much for coming on today, Dr. Seheult, and this comprehensive look at this critical sleep issue with practical tips for what people can do to resolve that. It's always a great pleasure to have you on. You're one of our very valued guests, and you've been with us right from the beginning, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We've learned how we can reset our internal clocks for a better night's rest, particularly through limiting light exposure at night and getting sunlight in the morning. Catering to the body's sleeping temperature change with a warm shower before bed and a cool bedroom climate, and even restricting sleep time, can also support a better night's rest. Up next, is coffee ultimately good or bad for us? Watch that one now by copying or clicking the link in the pinned comment or description below. And remember, you can subscribe to stay abreast of our Vital Signs Health Insights by clicking that big red button below. It's been great to be with you. I'm Brendon Fallon, and this is Vital Signs.